About 8 days after the war started, we set up on the border west of Lviv. And during the course of March, April, and May, we did 3 rotations of people. The second one in April and then the third one in May. Dermot was involved in those in Poland. Then in June, we shifted our operations to Kyiv, as the Ukrainian authorities had all moved governmental functions back to Kyiv at that point. So since June, we've been rotating people in and out in Ukraine itself. What started as a solely U.S. effort, growing out of this original grant, morphed into something much larger. First, the European Union approached about joining this project, then the United Kingdom. And this culminated in an announcement by Secretary Blinken, EU High Representative for Foreign Policy Borrell, and then UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, announcing the creation of the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. We have been, adding people to our roster of experts that we're able to deploy. We are receiving this week a large tranche of supplemental funding, which is going to allow us to really scale up our operations in Ukraine, and most importantly, to maintain an ongoing presence there. Instead of rotating people in and out, we will be able to have a group of prosecutors, investigators, and analysts that are on the ground continuously in Ukraine. Mainly what we are doing is just providing expertise, drawing on people that have extensive experience working in international tribunals or otherwise investigating and prosecuting these crimes, to provide that expertise, advice, mentoring to the Ukrainian prosecutor general and his office as they deal with what is now about 35,000 war crimes cases in Ukraine. So this will be an effort that I think will be going on for the next 2 to 4 years. There's certainly strong political support and financial support from the U.S. government in doing this. And this is a somewhat unique model. All of you are very familiar with the history of accountability efforts. This is the project. I initially was at Arizona State University when we started this. The project has followed me to Georgetown. So Georgetown University now has the lead as the lead implementing entity for this. And then we have a collection of other organizations, non-governmental organizations, the EU advisory mission, international organizations that form part of this consortium, which is then sponsored by the US, the EU, and the UK. So that's a bit of an explanation of what we're doing. Just in terms of what we've seen on the ground, I'll go through this very quickly and then turn it over to Dermot. I think from the very beginning, we were already seeing evidence of crimes. When the first meeting that I had with the Ukrainians on March 4th, they already at that point had identified about 300 potential war crimes cases 8 days into the conflict. As I said a moment ago, the number is now somewhere around 35,000 cases of atrocity crimes, another 15,000 cases involving crimes arising from collaboration with Russian forces. At the beginning, we were seeing evidence of war crimes. We were seeing indiscriminate use of force, shelling of civilian targets, these really crimes from a distance being committed by Russian troops. The first evidence of crimes against humanity emerged when Bucha and Irpin, these suburbs of Kyiv, were liberated by Ukrainian forces. And then we started seeing evidence of crimes against humanity, where you had large-scale killings of people, people blindfolded, hands tied, shot in the back of the head, systematic killings that were taking place at torture and interrogation centers, targeting of people as Russian forces moved around the village. And since then, we've seen this replicated in other areas as Ukrainian forces have retaken them and have moved in. And I think it's just a trend that is going to continue from this point forward. So I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions in a minute or two, but I'll pass it over to Dermot.
Dermot?
Thank you, Jim. So I'm honored once again to speak to the APSG at the Stimson Center and very much appreciate the invitation. I'd like to thank Ambassador Williamson for a very interesting presentation on the work of the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group. I went to the region twice in April under the auspices of ACA and fully appreciate the importance of ACA's work and the challenges it faces. I've been asked to be a commentator here today, and I will do so informed by my time in Poland and Ukraine, my own experience doing similar work in Cambodia, Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia, as well as my work as a domestic and international prosecutor. For me, there are many parallels and lessons to be learned from the Yugoslav conflict and efforts there to reconstitute and improve the legal systems in the republics of the former Yugoslavia. What appears to be a campaign of terror involving the indiscriminate shelling of residential buildings throughout Ukraine reminds me very much of the terror campaign Ratko Mladic waged against the civilian population of Sarajevo. Also similar is the task of supporting local prosecutors, judges, and defense counsel carrying on the necessary work of holding perpetrators of these crimes accountable in a way that respects individual rights and observes international standards. There are some unique characteristics of the task facing Ukrainian prosecutors that should shape international efforts to support them. First, my experience related to Ukraine has been that many prosecutors are skilled and experienced at supervising investigations and prosecuting cases. Ukrainian prosecutors, along with experienced police and intelligence investigators, are gathering the evidence I would expect competent, skilled investigators to be gathering. To the extent that I have learned what is in the criminal dossiers being assembled, they are doing a good job, particularly in light of the circumstances they are working under. They know how to do their jobs. What they need is training in the definitional requirements of international crimes and how those requirements dictate investigative work. Those of you who have worked in this field will know that in the relatively young area of international criminal law, there is much to learn, and the corpus of law is still growing and evolving. It can change in confusing ways. So I commend ACA's efforts to provide on-site support and expertise to Ukrainian prosecutors in these early days of building their first cases. For our part, last August, Daniel Conway, the Dean of Dickinson Law, agreed to enroll several senior Ukrainian prosecutors in my international criminal law course. They have Zoomed in twice each week since then and taken my class alongside Dickinson Law students. It is my hope that training senior prosecutors in this way will ground them and put them in a position to train their junior colleagues in the law they find themselves working with. This week, Dean Conway emailed her fellow deans at other law schools, asking them to consider similarly enrolling Ukrainian prosecutors, judges, and defense counsel in courses relevant to their work. Having Ukrainian prosecutors in my class has also made clear to me another important need that hopefully will be addressed with international support. As a war crimes prosecutor for nearly 12 years, I worked in my share of mass graves and with severely traumatized victims. Ukrainian prosecutors are now called to do the same, but with an important difference that has significant implications. They are working in their own communities where they know the victims and may even be related to them. Just yesterday, after a heavy night of bombardment in Kyiv, I asked one of the prosecutors in my class how she was doing. The stress in her eyes pierced through her professional demeanor, as she described how her husband was injured by one of the bombs Tuesday night. She said, "Now my family is a victim of a war crime." We need to recognize the need to support our colleagues in Ukraine in all of their needs. While their professionalism and experience will help them push through their own trauma for a time, we need to help them get the resources to do their jobs in a way that's sustainable and ultimately compatible with their long-term health. As a prosecutor, I was frequently asked to participate in training programs in the former Yugoslavia, offered by OSCE, the ABA, the EU, and other governmental and non-governmental organizations. In time, I became concerned about the overall effectiveness of these efforts. In the case of Bosnia, I would see the same prosecutors attending several trainings on the same topics offered in hotels during 3-day conferences. Although this training was important, it was not part of an overall coordinated effort, and thus it sometimes kept prosecutors away from their desks and away from doing their important work. In my last few years at ICTY, I no longer accepted invitations to do these trainings. For the past month, Dickinson Law has had the benefit of a Bosnian scholar doing a residency at the school. Professor Lana Bubalo gave a presentation this past Monday on her assessment of the current legal culture in Bosnia and how it was impacted by the war. I took the opportunity to ask how Bosnian scholars and lawyers, from the vantage points of 25 years after the war, now assess the efforts of the international community to rebuild and improve Bosnian legal institutions. She said that the efforts were a great benefit to the country, but in hindsight, there is a real sense that the lack of sufficient coordination made these efforts far less effective than they might have been. It is my hope that we learn this important lesson and that ACA, with some intentionality, seeks to help Ukrainian lawyers develop the structures and skills they need to ensure that the assistance they are receiving from all directions is coordinated in a way that best helps them and does not unproductively distract them from their work. Let me end with a concrete example. Consider Bucha. As a prosecutor, I was concerned by the myriad of international actors contributing to the work on the Bucha crime scenes. Too many people from different legal and investigative backgrounds working on the same case can ultimately impede successful prosecutions. One important way to support the work of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine is to help him and his senior staff develop the skill set needed to manage a large multinational effort to hold perpetrators responsible. In my considered view, for reasons I don't have time to discuss now, I believe that universal jurisdiction will be an important tool of accountability in this conflict, and if successfully employed, may turn the tide of the international community's ebbing commitment to international justice. Last month, I had Max Duplessis, an expert in universal jurisdiction, who argued the torture docket cases before the South African Constitutional Court. I had him speak to the Ukrainian prosecutors in my class. Both Max and I believe that universal jurisdiction, if brought to bear in an organized, thoughtfully structured way, could contribute significantly to justice efforts in Ukraine. Efforts not modeled on the multinational response to Bucha, but a more carefully coordinated process where the prosecutor general might ask German prosecutors to work with the regional prosecution office in Kharkiv and the French prosecutors with the regional office in Kherson and so on. Well-designed structures of coordination would allow foreign prosecutors to build a regional knowledge base essential to investigating and prosecuting universal jurisdiction cases, learn how differences between the Ukrainian criminal procedure law and their own legal systems impacts their work, and build working relationships between foreign and Ukrainian colleagues where meaningful transfers of knowledge and skills can take place. A multinational effort administered by senior Ukrainian prosecutors who have been given the necessary management training and supported with executive coaching could ultimately yield a more successful effort to hold low-level and senior perpetrators of these crimes accountable for them. So with that, again, I thank you, Jim, for inviting me, and Clint for your very interesting presentation on ACA's work, and I stand ready to support your work in any way I can in the future.
Thank you so much, Dermot. I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to ask one or two questions to each of you. And my first question to Clint, sort of following up on Dermot's comments on coordination, is how is the coordination working at this point, Clint? And in particular, you mentioned there are a number of NGOs who are part of this consortium that you've created. What steps are being taken to avoid a situation where we've got multiple groups in the same crime scene, re-interviewing and potentially re-traumatizing the same witnesses?
Yeah, I mean, coordination has been a huge challenge since day one. And I think in part because there were so many different actors trying to play a role on the ground, especially with the former prosecutor general. She had a tendency to say yes to everyone who walked in the door and offered something. And I think in part that was because she didn't want to leave herself exposed to criticism, that she had turned down anything that might be useful. But the result was that we had a tremendous duplication of efforts that was going on by different organizations. A lot of them, made big promises, but really didn't deliver on it. And in part, it was because they didn't actually put people on the ground. Very few of these organizations have deployed people physically to Ukraine. And it's not an easy thing. The logistical and security challenges that we've faced have been significant. But there was a lack of coordination. In large part, the impetus behind creating the Atrocity Crimes Advisory Group, the ACA, was to put in place a coordination mechanism that would channel the efforts of the US, the EU, and UK governments to assist the Ukrainians. And I think we have largely been successful in that. A lot of the people early on who volunteered to help, they sort of faded away at this point. And the Office of the Prosecutor General has come to see us as the most reliable and static partner, somebody that's actually been there since the beginning and continues to be there. And because it is being done through this governmental process, they also see this as the most viable way forward. One thing that I would say that's a bit different about the situation in Ukraine is actually quite unique to places that I've dealt with over the last 30 years. The more common scenario is the situation we see in places like Syria and Myanmar, where you have neither a domestic or an international accountability mechanism that's available. Domestic processes are not available because the governments in those places are hostile to any kind of accountability efforts because they themselves are complicit in crimes. International efforts have been stymied because of UN Security Council vetoes by Russia or China on referrals to the ICC. What we have in Ukraine is fairly unique. You do have a viable international process through the ICC. You have a viable domestic process through the legally constituted law enforcement and judicial authorities of a democratically elected government that we're being very supportive of. So unlike Syria or Myanmar, where documentation efforts were critical, where you're building evidence for potential future prosecutions, here we have been able to focus on building cases through the justice system from day one. And part of the coordination effort has been trying to, I think, get this across to some in the human rights, civil society realm, that we don't need the same type of documentation that we've needed in other cases, and trying to channel their work in a way that complements what the Office of the Prosecutor General is doing rather than conflicts with it. And I think we've seen some success. And just the last point that I would make is that with the appointment of the current Prosecutor General, Andre Costin, in July, he has done a much better job of trying to advance interagency cooperation throughout the Ukrainian government. So not only having a more coherent approach within the Office of the Prosecutor General, but also tying that in with what's being done through state security, the Ministry of Interior, with the Ministry of Defense. And there is a more coordinated process within the Ukrainian government now and with civil society. But there still is a bit of work to be done, particularly on the international side, with actors that are trying to play a role. Again, I think motivated by good intentions, but maybe just not having the right skill set or the ability to deliver on some of the things they're talking about.
But do you have any sense at this point of how the relationship with the ICC, between the Ukrainian prosecutor and the ICC, will unfold, and how cases might be divided there?
I mean, the relationship is quite good. There have been concerns from some in the Ukrainian government about the ICC, and they're not unlike concerns we've heard here in the U.S. from the Department of Defense or from the intelligence community that, you know, oh, the ICC might come after Ukrainians for committing crimes. And so there is back within the government about this, or pushback's maybe the wrong word, some wariness of what the ICC is going to do. But the Prosecutor General and the Office of the Prosecutor General has had a good working relationship with the ICC since day one. We work very closely with them, as we do with the Ukrainians. As you know, the ICC has never prosecuted more than 5 or 6 people in any of the situations that they've looked at. I think they're putting significantly more resources into Ukraine than they have any other situation. But even if they double that number, we're still talking 10 or 12 individuals being indicted. Presumably, these would be people at the highest levels of the Russian government, ministerial level, or the top uniformed military leadership. And everything that falls below that threshold level would be dealt with by the Ukrainians. The other area where the Ukrainians see a critical role for the ICC is in investigating crimes that are occurring in areas that remain under Russian occupation, in which the Ukrainians do not have access. Not that the ICC is getting access there either, but the feeling is that they might be better positioned to garner evidence from those areas than the Ukrainian domestic authorities are.
Dermot, could I ask you, the number of cases, 35,000 cases already, the volume of information from all of these crime scenes. Do you have any thoughts on just sort of the information management challenges and how these might differ from other situations that you've worked on previously?
Thanks for the question, Jim. Yeah, I mean, it's overwhelming, that number of cases. The amount of evidence. I mean, one thing that's new about this war is that there's evidence coming from all different kinds of sources. You know, organizations like Bellingcat are producing volumes and volumes of evidence, and then there are NGOs, the ICC, Ukrainian prosecutors. I know there have been some efforts to try to help them develop systems to manage all of this, and there's a lot of duplication in much of this evidence, and there are a lot of issues with respect to being able to authenticate a lot of this. So there are people working on that, but I'm not familiar enough with those efforts, Jim, to really speak with any kind of authority on it. But I would recognize that it really is an incredible challenge, far greater than any challenge that I faced at the ICTY. I think at the end we had over 8 million documents. I mean, for 35,000 cases and on all the things we see, the video clips and the documents being recovered as territory is recovered. To me, it must just be on a scale that would overshadow what we had in Bosnia.
You know, if my memory serves me right, at Nuremberg, I think there were like 10,000 documents that they were working with and 5,000 that they introduced into the actual prosecution. You had 8 million for the ICTY. I cannot imagine what this ultimately would be like. And moreover, the kinds of information. I would just think the amount of film footage and social media information just has to add an enormous additional dimension to all of this.
And some of it is really good evidence. To give you one example, so a lot of hospitals have been attacked. So as a prosecutor, you would have to establish it wasn't collateral damage, but it was a deliberate attack. And so that's a difficult thing to do. But there was a video of a tank firing into the front of a hospital in Mariupol. And I met with some open source expert who was able to trace the serial number, an identifying number on the side of that tank, and through open source materials, trace it back through the train it traveled on to that area, to where it first originated, and the command that it came from in Russia. So it's incredibly valuable evidence, particularly for a command and control case and for senior perpetrators. So it's not evidence you want to ignore, but to manage it is really a tremendous problem or challenge.